Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Kavinsky's Tutorials. Today I'm looking at Chord Jam by Audiomodern. Now I already reviewed one of their apps before, Riffer, so go and check that out if you haven't seen that. Very popular app. They've got another app, Playbeat, for example. I'm just thinking of what's available on iOS. I think at the moment for iOS they've only got these three available. Now, Chord Jam is coming out at the same time, simultaneous release for desktop and iOS. And Audiomodern have given me 5 copies of any Audiomodern app, desktop or iOS, to give away to subscribers to the channel. So that's very generous of them to let me give away desktop apps as well as iOS apps. I really appreciate that. So thank you, Audiomodern, for that. It's extremely kind of you. Now, all the details of what you've got to do to win, as usual, are in the pinned comment at the top of the YouTube comments section. Please, as always, everybody, do read it carefully because there are instructions there that you've got to follow in order to qualify for winning. The winners will be announced after 2 days. Anyway, all the other details are there in that pinned comment. So what is Chord Jam? Well, basically, it is 3 things. One thing, it can generate chords that we can play with one finger. So you see here we've got this little keyboard. And you can see all I'm doing here is pressing this one note and I'm getting this lovely chord and it's being played with a kind of strummy effect. And we've got a lot of control over things like the voicing, the velocity, and the timing of this strumming effect. Okay, so this is one of the main things it does. We've got a lot of settings up here that we'll look at later that help to set up exactly how this will sound. So basically one finger chords, right? That's what we're getting here. Now, we've also got here, this part here, which we can turn off or on. This is called the sequencer section. So here we can arrange sequences of chords. We can also do arpeggiation, by the way, and we can arrange mixes of arps and chords. So arpeggiated chords and just regular chords. Okay, so chord generation section, that's number 1. Sequencer section down here, number 2. And then kind of hidden away over here on the right of the sequencer section is another part called the pads section, and here we can put certain chords or arpeggiated chords into these pads, and then we can trigger these pads. And you could, for example, trigger those with a launch pad as well or something like that. You could in theory trigger them with a keyboard, but well, I'll talk about that later. It's one of my little criticisms of this app as it is at the time that it's coming out. Now, if you're a regular of my channel, you'll know that whether developers are giving me free codes to give away or not, doesn't matter. I give extremely honest reviews. I'm going to do a detailed walkthrough of the app. I'm going to cover about 80 or 90% of what's in the manual. So if you watch this video, you mostly won't really need to read the manual. They did do a very good manual, though. I'm always really, really happy with the Audiomodern's manuals. They're always excellent. They really set a great example for what good manuals should be like. But anyway, a lot of people don't really like reading manuals, so this video will cover most of the stuff that you would get in the manual. I'll also, throughout the video and again towards the end, summarize what I like about the app and mention some things that I'm not so crazy about. I'll also mention some things that Audiomodern have already told me in response to my feedback and criticisms will be added or improved in later updates. This company is very open to user feedback. So I do expect that even in the first update to this app, there will be fairly significant changes. Definitely a couple of them will have come from my own feedback. I've been in touch with Max from Audiomodern quite a lot over the past few days, given my feedback on things that I think need to be added to make this better, and they've been very receptive, so that's great. Okay, so let's close this pads section and let's start our walkthrough. So first I'm going to walk you through the the chord generation section up here. So I'm just going to turn this sequencer off just not to distract from things. Okay, there are a few things that are pretty obvious, like, here's the BPM, but because we're running it in our host, it's going to be synced to the BPM. I'm not going to look at the standalone version. Obviously, a couple of things will be slightly different in the standalone version. I'm using it as an audio unit here, but I do want to mention that it can generate its own sounds, and it is pretty nice. It's got a kind of organ sound. So if you don't have other apps that you want to trigger with this, you can still just get Chord Jam, and you can have a lot of fun playing with this standalone app, but just be aware that it's only got one inbuilt sound. So here I'm using it to trigger pure piano. Later I'll maybe let you hear it on a synth. Okay, now a couple of things. So it's got an undo button, so that's very useful. Although I have had some strange behavior from the undo button at times. Didn't quite do what I expected. I've been in touch with Audiomodern about that, and they're looking into it. We've got a panic button here. We've got a button where we can save our presets, and we can save different types of presets. I'll maybe come back to that later if I don't get time. It's simple enough, and it's in the manual. We've got a settings section here that, again, I won't look at right now. If I don't look at it later, that's pretty simple, and it's in the manual. Now, this is the part that I'm most interested in here. So we come down here, and here we're choosing our key. So you can see that I've got a C selected. We've got this trigger button here that I'll talk about a little bit later on. Here we can, okay, look, click or drop your audio file here. Chord Jam will analyze the imported file, and it will suggest the appropriate scale and key. So you can actually open up files. They have to be WAV files, and it can analyze the key. But to be honest, so far I have not had really much success. Anything I've tried with that, I got back an error message. It could not analyze file or something like that. But Audiomodern tell me that it's been working fine for them, so no idea what's going on there. Anyway, it's something that I'm sure will be fixed. Or it could be something with the audio files that I've been using with it. Another thing that I asked for, which is going to be added, is why can't it analyze MIDI files, right? That's also very useful. A lot of us are working with MIDI, and Audiomodern have agreed that they are going to add that feature, that they will allow an analyze MIDI file function as well. So that can, in theory at least, automatically detect the scale and key. So then here we choose our scale, and I've just gone for something pretty simple to start with, just a minor scale here. Here we can randomize our scale type. Now I'll just mention, excuse me, we've got a lot of different scale types, but it seems there is no way to do custom scales. So that's a feature that's missing that I would like to see added. I actually haven't mentioned this one to Audiomodern. But yeah, Audiomodern, can you maybe add a way that we can make our own custom scales here? Would be useful. Now here we've got this trigger thing that, again, I'll talk about later because it's a bit more of an advanced feature, and going into it now will confuse things a little bit. Just going to go back to minor for now. Now, the number of voices that's shown here, by the way, that will change depending on sometimes the things that we choose, particularly here over in the chord type. Some chord types will have more voices, some will have less, but we can also adjust this ourselves manually. Now here we've got a huge big randomization button. So if I press this, this is going to randomize the voices. Now that means what octaves these different voices are being played at, the velocity of each voice, and the timing of the strum-in effect. So let's hear what that sounds like. So here's what I've been using until now. And now let's try randomization. So that can come up with some pretty nice sounding things. Now, in a little while, we'll look at ways that we can limit what will be randomized. Over here, we can just move everything up or down, a maximum of 2 octaves. So here we have our chord type. So at the moment, we've got dominant 7th selected. Now let me turn on this. See, it's not letting me turn on this voice because this doesn't have 5 voices. But if choose this one, for example, you can see that it automatically opened up 5 voices. So again, we've got a randomize here. So, that can actually be really cool to just play one note on the keyboard, right? And just see what it comes up with. It's also a nice way to learn about what different chords sound like. Okay. Now, here, so this randomization button will randomize all 3 of these sections. If I go over to this randomization thing here, this will just randomize the voices, so the velocity and the time will not be affected. Now we can adjust these manually. Just click. Now you can see these things are similar, by the way, in each of these 3 sections. If I go to this second button, this will be familiar to you if you know Riffer. What this will do is randomize the voices every time I play a note. Now what this will do is it will lock this. So if I press this big randomization button, okay, we can see that only this one is locked, voices is locked, velocity is not locked, this time section is not locked. So now when I press the randomization button, each time I press it, it will randomize velocity and time, but it will not randomize voices. So just notice that this is going to stay the same each time. You see how that's staying the same? So that's what the lock button does. And then here we've got just revert to default button. So when we come to the velocity section, we've got the same things. So I won't go through those again. Remember that you can drag everything yourself to set it up the way you want. But also 2 very important buttons here, the lower and upper limit for the velocity randomization. Now, if I want to manually, I can still drag outside those points. But when I randomize, now this will be the minimum velocity setting for each voice. This will be the maximum. So this allows you to do randomization without things getting ridiculously different every time. It would be very unnatural in most situations to have massive random variations in velocity. like it with the softer velocities here. Let's put on the infinite mode. So coming over to the time section, again, we can adjust. So I won't go through that again. But what we can also do is we can arpeggiate. So we have a few different types of arpeggiation. We can do completely random, or we can do up or down. That one's sounding really nice with this. So there all the notes are being played, but they're still being rhythmized according to this rate here. So you can see we've got triplets here, but we don't have any dotted. Didn't notice that before. That's something that could be added. We can also add swing. Pretty cool. That's quite a lot, of course. Now then, we've got the sync section. Again, we have minimum and maximum points for our randomization if we want. And then when we drag along here, we'll see our values. Again, no dotted values, so that's something that, in my opinion, should be added. So the sync, actually, I asked for this to be added because originally that was not there. And without that, when you played at low speeds, it was really strange because it just wasn't making the spaces between the strums slow enough. So it's nice that it's got this now for something more. That can work at very, very slow speeds. Something more ambient. Now, I said I would look at the trigger thing. So here we have turned trigger on. We can see that here we've got this here, and we've also got it here. I think we've got it somewhere else as well, but it must be in the sequence section or something. Can't see it here. So let's look at this one first. So when I open this, you can see that all of these are selected. And what that means now is that it's gonna randomize the key, and it will freely randomize between any of these keys. Where have I got no sound here? Let's see. Let's bring the BPM up. You can see I'm just playing the same note here. But you can see that's changing every time. And you can see here that's changing. So what's the difference between that and just complete randomization? Well, the difference is here we can select which keys we actually want to be triggered. So we deselect things by pressing on them. And we can also just double click to deselect everything, or double click again to select everything. So let's say now I've got everything deselected, and now let's say I choose C and let's say G. So now it will only be allowed to vary between those. Turn it on first, sorry. You see how it's only moving between C and G here? So that's a pretty cool feature. And as I say, we've got that over here as well for scale type. So I could turn this on and I could get it to, let's say, okay, let me just deselect everything. I could allow it to do, say, just major and minor. And then I could add in, say, melodic minor. Nah, doesn't sound great. Let's take that one away. So anyway, you get the idea. Obviously, the more you know about music theory, the more use you're going to be able to make of this. If you don't know much about music theory, you might be taking a bit of a stab in the dark, and sometimes it might come out well, sometimes not. Okay, so let's move on and look at the sequencer. Okay, so I'm sending Chord Jam into an instance of Xeon. And if we open up Chord Jam, so remember, go down to the sequencer section, turn it on, and first, there's nothing happening here. We don't have any sequence set up. Now, what is the fastest thing we can do? Let's just press this sequencer randomize button. And you can see this has immediately brought up a sequence. Now, there's not really randomizing, actually, it's just triggering it. So you can see I'm pressing it again and again, nothing's changing. Now, let's look over a few things here first of all. So we have the robot sequencer, and then we have a human sequencer. We activate those by pressing on them. When they're active, they're lit up. When they're gray like this, they're inactive. So let's say in this human sequencer, for example, if I want to add a chord, I just play. Find something I like. Let's just start with this. So I play the note that I want to put in the sequencer. Then I press here, and now that note is in the sequencer, and now I can drag it to make it as long or as short as I want. So you can see at the moment, we've just got the human sequencer and all I've done is put one chord in. If I wanted to add another chord, let's just say that. Let's not worry about how good this sounds. Right? I just added in by playing a note, finding something I like, adding it and dragging it to make it the size that I want. Now I can play both the robot and the human one at the same time. Or now, for example, we're just playing the robot one. Okay, another thing that I can do is adjust here by dragging this. Now, I have found that the sensitivity of this is a little bit funny sometimes. So I've now made a super short sequence. Now I can, if I take it from the middle, I can drag it along. If I grab it here at the left, I can shorten it in this direction. If I grab it here, I'm shortening it in that direction. If I double click, I'm again bringing it up to the whole length. So let's put on the robot sequencer again and play around with that. So what's cool here is you can get nice polyrhythms going. You can also do some kind of weird stuff. Like, see, there I was trying to shorten that and it wasn't successful. It dragged it instead. So I've spoken to Audiomodern about this. They're going to work on the sensitivity of this. It's a little bit hard to do with accuracy. Sometimes when you want to shorten, it thinks that you want to drag. This will be improved and should be easy to fix. So look at this. We can also drag around. Well, so you can possibly come up with some cool things with that. If we double tap this, it will expand again automatically to fill the full length. So that's very useful as well. Now here we can also control the number of steps. And here we're controlling the time signature. Now here at the moment it's set on program. We can also set it to randomize. So look at what's selected here. We got 1, 4, 5. So we click here and we can see indeed that is selected, a 1, 4, 5 progression. So we could change that, right, to any of these. We just do that by clicking on them. Now we got a 1, 4, 6. We get back out of this by clicking this little X again. Let's turn on the robot sequencer. Let's make this full size again first. So you hear how that has changed? Now another thing we can do is we can drag these to rearrange them. Another thing we can do is duplicate them. So that's program. So you'll see that what is here changed, right? Now we've got, look, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1, 6, 7. 1, 6, 7. But we can also add things ourselves by clicking here. So if we look now, the selected keys have been added. Okay, now one thing we can do is we can go here and we can choose a groove. So at the moment we've got pop 2. Let's change this to something. So notice here, straight 3. Remember, we're only looking at the robot sequence here. Notice that it's now playing only 3 chords. If I go to straight 2, it'll only play 2 chords. See, we've only got 2 chords here. So there are a lot of different grooves here. All a groove means is just different lengths of chords, basically. So you can experiment with those and find something you like. Now, another thing you can do is just choose random groove. And every time I press this button, it'll be randomized. And you can see here, this is where we set the number of chords that's going to be contained in the random sequence. So let's put it up to 9. And now again I press this button. Now we have 9 chords in this random sequence. Now we also have here this infinity button. So if I turn this on, you can see this happening already. Every time it gets to the end of the sequence, it's going to randomize. Now what it's randomizing is the groove and also the notes. So it's still selecting from these notes, but the order of them will be random. C, A, G, F. Right, yeah, it's different. Now, if we change this, for example, okay, we can tap a value in. Let's tap in a value of 3. Didn't work. So now what it's going to do is it's going to play through the sequence 3 times before it randomizes. Down here, we can do a few things. So here, this right arrow, okay, watch for example where this, let's turn off infinite first. Okay, so now it's going to stay the same. So just keep your eye on the position of this A. And now I'm going to press this left arrow. And what you'll see is that getting moved back 1/16 each time. Obviously, if we go over here, then we're moving forwards. That sounds a bit better like that. So that's one thing we can do, moving backwards and forwards. Now, another cool thing we can do is we can basically copy the robot sequence into the human sequence, or vice versa. So for example, if I press this here, what it has now done is it has copied what was in the robot sequence into the human sequence. So this can be cool, so that we can do the same the other way around. If I press this, it'll copy what's in the human sequence into the robot sequence. So what this means is, for example, you could set up a human sequence. You could then copy it into the robot sequence, and then you could make some adjustments to your human sequence, and you could then either vary between them, jump between them, or you could run both at the same time. You could get a kind of fugue type thing going on. We can also just completely delete a sequence by pressing the trash can here. So another couple of important things to point out here. Remember that we can still play around with this chord generation section. And for example, we can do things like change it to an ARP. So now everything's ARPing. And then we could do things like use triggers and allow, for example, only 8ths and 16ths. And when triggers on, it'll vary between those. I didn't select them. There we go. So now it's varying between 8ths and 16ths. We could add in 30 seconds, which doesn't sound great, so let's take that away. So that can be a cool thing to do. Let me undo. By the way, I wish there was a redo button here. I really wish there was a redo button. Okay, so another thing we can do is we can select an individual note. So if I click, for example, on this one here, and let's say now I go into ARP. So you see now, only this one is ARPing, and the others stay doing their chords. So when something is selected like this, and it's got the white border, it's in edit mode, and any changes that we make will only apply to that. So I think you can see clearly that that is incredibly powerful and fun. Okay, so let's move on and look at the pads. Actually, there's one thing I just realized that I still didn't explain fully about the sequencer, and I think I was wrong about this earlier. So progression and random, when random is selected, it will still play whatever chords are here in the selected keys area, just it won't play them in order, right? But when it's in progression mode, it's gonna play these in order. It's gonna do this B, A, C, A, G, F, F sharp, right? So progression will play these in order. Even if we randomize the groove, we're just randomizing the length of the chords. It's still going to follow this progression. But random is going to play the same keys, but it's going to randomize the order. There's another thing that I realized that I haven't explained yet, I think, and that is this, why we have two notes shown in each of these squares. So if we go back up here to the settings, we have one thing here. We see keyboard mode, absolute and relative. So at the moment it's on relative. I think that's the default if I remember. So if we change it to absolute, what it'll mean is that no matter what key I set here, this is still going to play a C note. But if I set it on relative, if I, for example, change this key to a D, then actually the first thing here will be a D. So let's show that. So I change this to a D. Let me just turn off the sequencer a second. So you see, now I'm pressing the C, but it's actually playing a D. If I go back up here, change this back to absolute, and now I go back here. See, only when I'm on the D note, it's going to play the D. So in the sequencer, we'll also see this reflected when we're looking here. And so here you can see now these have different values. Okay, I'm glad I remembered to explain that because that can be a bit confusing. All right, let's move on finally to the pads. So again, just to remember that we toggle between sequencer view and pads view by pressing this button. So in pads view, we have 16 assignable pads. Now these will send out MIDI CC information. So if we go up to settings here and we go down, we can see here trigger pad number 1. So that's this one. That is sending out MIDI on CC40. Actually, sorry, receiving MIDI on CC40. So if you're using some kind of pad controller or whatever to control this, then whatever pad is sending out CC40 is going to trigger this. Now, one thing I asked Audiomodern for, this is insanely annoying to me that it only has the choice to trigger with CCs, because it would be much easier if it also gave an option for notes. Because, for example, if I want to, let's say, use my MIDI keyboard to trigger these pads, right? Let's say I don't have a launch pad or whatever. I may just want to use my normal regular MIDI keyboard. Now, there are apps that you can get that will convert CC to MIDI notes, etc. But really, that's a pain in the ass to have to do. Anyway, luckily, Audiomodern agree, and they're going to add in the next update that we can also assign MIDI notes here to trigger these pads. So then we can trigger the pads with our external keyboard. But for the meantime, you can still trigger the pads on the screen, right? So this works in a similar way to back in the sequencer section when we talked about the human sequencer. Here, what we did was you played a note that you liked, and then the last note that you played down in these keys, when you pressed here, it would get assigned to the human sequence. So back in the pads, it's the same principle. So let's say I want to assign that to this pad. All I do is do that, and it's been added. Now let's say I want this, but let's say I want it to be arpeggiated. I click on ARP. Okay, let's say I like that. Now I click here, and now you can see that has been assigned to that. And you can see this shows that this is a chord. We also see which note it was triggered with. Here we can see that this is an ARP, and we also see which note it is triggered with. So remember, these don't refer to the chord that's being played necessarily. They refer to these notes here. And remember that what these actually play could vary depending on whether you're in absolute mode or relative mode. And remember that by default, it's in relative mode. So what we can do here then is we can basically set up something for a live performance. Now, I just put a few things together very quickly here. My time for this review has been limited. You know, Audiomodern have, I think, because they sent me a little clip, I think over on their YouTube channel, you'll be able to see some clips of some very cool setups that they have done, illustrating the more artistic uses of this. I have not really had enough time to spend with this app to produce really cool things with it. My focus in this video is just on showing you how to use it. Frankly, I've spent a lot of time, as I mentioned earlier, just dealing with Audiomodern, telling them, it doesn't have this feature, why not? I think it should have this, I think it should have that. So that, unfortunately, has taken up a lot of my time. And I've had very limited time to actually spend trying to make any kind of music on this thing. But you can see how this could work for a live performance. Now, at the moment of release, there are a few weird glitches with the pads. Like, for example, I'm pressing pad 9 now, and now I'm pressing 10. And as soon as I take my finger off pad 9, pad 10 stops. This is definitely not desired behavior. I've spoken to Audiomodern about it, and they're going to fix it. This is kind of always the way, to be honest, with Audiomodern's apps. When they come out, there are usually a few little glitches. Then they listen a lot to user feedback, and within the first month, they bring out an update that has a massive amount of new stuff added and bugs fixed. So I wouldn't worry too much about any bugs that are in this currently. They will be fixed very quickly. Like I say, I've given tons of feedback, and in fact, Audiomodern got back to me with a list yesterday of 15 things that they have already decided are going to be either added or fixed in the first update, which will be out within a month. Maybe in my conclusion, I'll mention a couple of what those things are. Now, with the pads, latch, okay, so this will basically sync it to your DAW so that the pad will not play until the next 16th note. You can turn that off if you want the pad to be triggered unquantized. By the way, you can't play these polyphonically. It'll only let you play one pad at a time. Yeah, if I touch with 2 fingers, it's only going to play one pad. So I do feel there's a bit of work that could be done on this pad section to give a lot more options. If you look at something like Atom 2, for example, which I reviewed a couple of months ago, it's just insane the amount of different options that users have been given for different ways to use pads to trigger sounds. I would strongly recommend Audiomodern to take a look at how Atom 2 implemented that and learn a few things from that, because that was just an incredible implementation of this kind of idea. I think this one could be a bit better, to be honest. Now, we can clear pads. We do that by, we can clear everything by pressing clear all. But if we want to just clear one pad, what we do is press the clear button and then click. And as long as this clear button is selected, any pad that I click on will be cleared. And if I then want to go into the creating pads again, I need to turn off this clear, and now it'll work as normal. Whatever's the last note that I play here, I can assign it to any pad. Again, I want to clear that. I go back and do that. Now, one thing that I said to Audiomodern is missing here, and it's mind-boggling to me how they didn't notice this. You can't drag pads around to move them. So that's pretty bizarre, because again, if we go back here and we go to this section, we can drag the selected keys around. It seems pretty obvious to me that most people are going to be quite experimental maybe in the way they lay the pads down, and then over time they might decide, oh well, actually this would be a more intelligent order. This would be a better way to do things. So yeah, they've already said they're going to bring in a drag function here that's going to be added. Okay, so now I would just like to go into the last part of the video, and the main thing I'll do here is talk about what things that I like about the app and the improvements that I think are needed. I'll also mention some of the improvements, the important ones, that Audiomodern have already committed to adding to the first update. So just before we get on to that list of things that I'd like to see improved, as well as things that I like about the app, I'd like to show you one possible cool setup that certainly I have really enjoyed playing around with, and that is to use chord pad to trigger chords. Now here, as you can see, let me get my mouse going again. I've got the AUM keyboard triggering the Chord Jam keyboard. So when I play here on the AUM keyboard, I'm playing Chord Jam, and Chord Jam is going into pure piano, which is just beautiful, by the way. I recommend you check out my video on that if you haven't bought it yet. But then the really cool thing to do is to set up another pure piano, and this time I'm putting KB1 by KRS. And what I've done here is I've got this keyboard set up on the same scale that Chord Jam is using, a C minor scale. And what's nice here is we can very easily play the velocity as well, with lower being lower velocity and higher being higher velocity. So what can be really nice is to just Just do a bit of soloing, you know, with the right hand. And then play chords in with the left hand. Just one-note chords, right? Using the AUM keyboard to play Chord Jam. The reason I'm doing that is just because the AUM keyboard is nice and it's a decent size. It's right here at the bottom of the screen. I could do it directly in Chord Jam itself, of course. So this is one way I see myself using this a lot. And in Chord Jam, to be able to do this, we could set it up to sync, for example. Or try it on free mode, whatever. Okay, so let's get into our conclusion. Obviously, this is a pretty cool app. I mean, I love the idea of one-finger chords. I think that the Audiomodern interfaces are always really nicely done. In general, it works quite well as a touch interface, apart from, as I said, some issues with the pads and a few things with the sequencer as well, with the shortening and lengthening and dragging not really being as responsive as I would like. But in general, it's a nice interface. I would say one thing though, you know, I am a mobile device user. I make all my music on an iPad pretty much at the moment. I don't use my desktop much. And that means also that I'm often outside under different lighting conditions and so on. And this really isn't good when you're outside on a sunny day, even with the iPad at full brightness and you're wearing sunglasses. I have real difficulty reading things like this with a pair of sunglasses on. So, you know, the interface looks nice. I like the colors and everything, but I would like to see a bit more contrast. I personally would prefer if things like chord type or scale type or whatever were actually white rather than just this kind of purple color that's very similar really to this background color. Anyway, try it for yourself. Sunny day, outside, sunglasses, quite hard to read the chord types. So that's a minor little thing. So I love the way we've got the control over the voices and the velocity. I love how we can randomize the velocity, but within certain parameters. You know, we've got these cool trigger functions where we can set up, sorry, that's not the trigger. Where's the trigger gone? We'll find it somewhere. Yeah, here. So the trigger functions, as we looked at, can be very, very powerful for doing a certain much more targeted randomization. The infinity button can be cool as well. You know, we've got the lock. So we've got all these really quite powerful features. There's a lot packed in, even just to this section. You know, even if this app just had this, it would be pretty cool. But then we're adding in the sequencer, and we got, you know, just so much stuff that we can do here. The ability to edit individual steps on the fly, really cool. So that's great. And then we've got the pads as well, which, as I say, not really working all that well for me at the moment. Definitely feel there could be some improvements. Wouldn't mind a choice between monophonic and polyphonic, for example. And just in general, a lot of other things. But my main criticism about the pads would be that at current, if you want to trigger them with a keyboard using MIDI notes rather than CCs, then you're going to have to use some kind of converter app like MFX Convert, which is a paid app in the App Store. You could use Mosaic. I think you'd have to write your own script. I don't think, there was some discussion about this on the Audiobus forum yesterday. I don't think there is currently a Mosaic script already that does that. So then I've got lots of other small little criticisms. So no custom scales, but actually after I made my first half of the video, I got talking to Audiomodern about that, and they said, look, we've done tons of research here on, you know, what's going to work in terms of scale types and chord types. And there are a lot of potential things that can go wrong with opening this up to custom scales. So it's possible that it might not get custom scales. And what I would say in their defense is that there are a lot of scales here. So I don't think the lack of custom scales is that big a deal. And if, as they say, it could create problems in the way the voicings work and the chord types work, then maybe it's fine that that's not in there. What else? I don't like that the ARP section has, and in fact all the time sections, there is just nowhere that has any dotted notes. But Audiomodern said they will add this, so that's great. Then what else? So here, as I say, I did not have much luck getting this to analyze files for me. So I do not think that the audio file analyzing is very good, or at least it's not working well on my iPad. There's also currently no drag and drop, even though it does say click or drop. It actually doesn't work. The only way you can do it currently is by clicking. So hopefully they can add drag and drop, because, for example, Atom 2, you can drag and drop MIDI files into that. So yeah, anyway, hopefully that'll be added. Also, as I say, hopefully get analysis of MIDI files added to this, so you can click or drag MIDI files on here to get them analyzed into scale and key. That would be great. What else have we got? Okay, one thing that I suggested that I thought would be really cool would be if we could actually send out voices on different MIDI channels. For example, I think that could be really cool to try and put together a sort of little brass ensemble using the SWAM instruments or things like that. You know, you have some monophonic instruments and you want to get a collection of these monophonic instruments playing together in an interesting way. I think it'd be an interesting experiment to see what you could do with sending different voices out on different MIDI channels. What else? Okay, another thing. Currently, parameters are not exposed here. Sorry, this is just not acceptable to me. Any audio unit app should have audio units exposed on release, but Audiomodern have said they are going to add that to the first update, that's for sure. In the meantime, you have already customizable CC mappings in the app itself, but still, people like for example, AUM has now very, very good and clever ways of assigning this kind of MIDI mapping. So it's really disappointing that the parameters are not exposed to hosts. Okay, what else? Coming back to the ARP, for example, one thing I said to Audiomodern is, okay, look, we've got trigger function for the rates. And again, I won't explain what that is because I did it already in the video. But we don't have trigger for ARP types, and that would be something that would be cool. For example, maybe I would want to set it up that I want some ARP randomization, but I only want it to go between up and down and all, for example. So it would be good to have a trigger for that, and Audiomodern like that idea, so hopefully that will also get added. What else? I'm just looking at the list that I made here. Oh yeah, so in the pads section, if I assign something to a pad, I can't edit it. So it's different from the sequencer section, because in the sequencer section, if I take this, for example, I can edit this, but I can't do any editing in the pad section. If I want to change this pad, the only way that I can change it is just by completely clearing it and doing it again. I can't change it once it's in there. I can't change it from an ARP to a time 1, for example. It won't change. So Audiomodern also agree that that would be a good thing to be added. What else? Yeah, the undo button seemed a little bit buggy to me at times. I wasn't really sure what was going on, but it didn't always do what I expected. Another thing, there's no redo button. So I think it should have a redo button, and Audiomodern are, I think, going to add a redo button. So like I say, you know, seriously, super responsive developer. Yes, it is coming out with a few bugs that personally I would prefer if it was just being released a week or two later with these things added. But I don't know, different developers have their own way of doing things. One thing I will say about Audiomodern is this seems to be their policy. They listen a lot in the first month or so after release, and they do add a lot of stuff. Like I say, I've been just incredibly impressed by how responsive Max from the Audiomodern team has been in my conversation with him on Twitter. Really great guy. So, yeah. So everyone, if you haven't done it already, thanks for making it to the end of this video, and I hope that you've given this a thumbs up, etc. if you found it useful. Hopefully you're already a subscriber to the channel, but if you're not and you're interested in getting these kind of extremely in-depth videos that pretty much nobody else is doing on a regular basis the way I am, then, you know, I'd strongly suggest subscribing to the channel. Not only that, almost always have absolutely insane giveaways like the one for today's video. Not normally quite as insane as this, but normally have good giveaways on this channel, with the winners getting their apps quickly as well and not having to wait for a week or two. I will generally send you the apps if you win almost immediately. It depends if the developer has to send them to me first. So the chances are you'll have your app, you know, 2 or 3 days after this video is released if you're one of the winners. Okay, everyone, I'll see you in the next video. Take it easy.